Hello everyone, welcome back to the AFP podcast. I'm Leah.
I'm Kalia.
I'm Emmy.
I'm Reese.
And I'm also Emmy.
And today we're going to be talking about sexual violence on campus as well as Consent Week at X, which was last week. And we're here with Emmy.
I'm a Reversible at X peer educator here on campus, which means I work for the Sexual Violence Prevention and Education team. My job mostly encompasses running events that increase the visibility, hence the name Visible at X, of resources for sexual violence survivors and people who choose to be upstanders, so intervene against sexual violence here on campus. And we also do consent training and bystander intervention training for all incoming students every year, as well as varsity athletes and really any other group on campus who wants to take that training during the year.
What is Consent Week at X?
Last week was Consent Week, which is actually a nationally celebrated holiday, if you will. It happens at campuses all across Canada and essentially is a week to increase the visibility of resources for sexual violence survivors and remind people of what encompasses healthy and respectful consent. So we had a couple events last week. We did some residence outreach programming where we went into the residence buildings, played some trivia games with them, offered free candy and condoms, and just reminded students about the importance of consent and what constitutes consent. We also had a consent and ice cream event where we gave out ice cream sundaes and tried to spark some discussions around healthy consent and how to know that you've obtained it. As well, we had a Venus Envy event where we had a drag queen, Venus Envy, come in and talk to us about consent and safe sex. We had Take Back the Night, which we might talk a little bit more about later, but it is also an international event where students on campuses around the world gather and discuss the importance of raising survivors' voices, and particularly the voices of historically marginalized groups. So on our campus specifically, we partner with Sisters in Spirit and the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Project to raise the voices of Indigenous survivors specifically, because we know in Canada, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is a massive problem, and Indigenous individuals experience sexual violence at an extremely high rate. And lastly, on the Friday, we had what we call Fries for Fries, which is at Meal Hall. We had a French fry bar, all sorts of random stuff you can put on French fries. And we just talk about our acronym FRIES for consent and how to know that you've obtained it.
Yeah, do any of you guys know what FRIES is?
It stands for freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific.
Awesome, that was great. Yeah, so all incoming students learn about the FRIES acronym during their incoming student training day, where they take Waves of Change, which is our locally developed and evaluated recently bystander intervention training, where we talk about what is sexual violence, what is consent, how to know when you don't have consent, and how to intervene when you might be witnessing sexual violence.
For these events, what would you say, how many people show up for each?
It really depends on the event. So we kind of measure based on how many people take the bags of candy and condoms and stuff like that. And I know for a fact we had at least 200 people participate in the residence outreach programs. Next year, I think we're going to turn it into a competition between the residences to see who can have more people participate,
Nice.
Which will be kind of fun. I'm not sure about Wednesday. Usually around 50 people come to each of those events. Thursdays Take Back the Night. There were, I would guesstimate, around 60 people there. I was one of the MCs, which was really fun for me. And that's kind of a rally and a march around campus to reclaim spaces that have typically not elevated survivor voices. And I couldn't tell you on Friday, I'm sure lots of people came by and got free French fries at Meal Hall.
So I'm just going to ask the people in the room, did you guys see the posters or participate in any of the events? Or did you guys know what was going on with Consent Week?
Yeah, I think it was made pretty well known as far as information on social media and just generally posters around campus goes. I think participation-wise can sometimes be harder this specific week because people have midterms, but I do think as far as being informed about the events going on, it was pretty well done.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think with midterms and things like that, it was maybe a bit harder for people to participate, but I do think the advertising and the social media was... I agree. I definitely had some friends who went to the Take Back the Night and they enjoyed it a lot. I also
got some free french fries, and I did know what it was for because I did see those posters around.
Okay, so I think that the whole idea was to increase visibility and also spread awareness of consent, and I think you guys did a good job of that because everyone's seeing the posters, so good job. I want to talk about Take Back the Night. This is a space where people have posters, and you could call it many things. I would say that it's kind of a survivor's walk or a march for justice, or I would say Emmy knows a little bit more about this, but Emmy was telling me earlier that in the past, it was a required event for certain communities on campus to go to, and now they don't do that because it had a really bad outcome. So I would like you to talk about that maybe.
Yeah, so not even that it was a bad outcome necessarily, but Take Back the Night has evolved significantly. Take Back the Night as a concept has existed internationally for upwards of 50 years. People have been doing this on campuses and in communities and spaces truly around the world. One of my supervisors at work is from India, and she hosted these at her undergrad school in India. A few years ago, there was a couple groups on campus that it was required for them to go because it looked good for their reputation. And unfortunately, they were not super respectful, not outwardly disrespectful, but it was very clear to everybody there, they didn't give a crap. They didn't really want to be there. They were there because they had to be. The whole space is designed to have their voices heard and elevated. And if there's somebody there who doesn't really give a crap, that's a really damaging image for, the people who are hosting, for that group, especially, they were there to elevate their reputation, and it kind of backfired. So we do not make attendance for any group on campus mandatory in any way. This is a space that people should be showing up in because they want to be there, not because they feel like they have to be there. It's supposed to be a really uplifting, really positive space. We've really tried to reframe it and reshape it into that kind of, I guess I'm using the word space a lot, but that kind of, we want that energy where people are there because they want to have their voices heard and they want to hear the voices of.
When you're putting survivors in a space in an academic community and you're saying sexual violence is happening here, and then you have the same people laughing in your face, it's completely, I don't know, it kind of becomes an entire joke to them.
It does, absolutely. So. And I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard this saying before, but if you have a space where wolves and sheep are both invited, you will only have wolves.
Yeah.
So I think that it's really important that we make sure that this is a safe space and a space where survivors are heard and the people who are there want to be there and listening to their voices.
I think it's nice that it is no longer mandatory because obviously we want to keep that safe space, like Emmy was saying, a safe space. But I also think it's really nice that some groups, I know speaking as someone who is on the AFP Student Council, were encouraged to go. Not forced, but just encouraged, given that it's so relevant to our study and things we learn about in class and in practicum. I think that's important, that kind of encouragement to push people to get involved in something like that. I wasn't able to attend because of a scheduling issue, but I know there were quite a few other people on the AFP Student Council who were able to attend, and not only attend and show their support, but also kind of help promote it further. So that's also a really nice, important aspect of it.
And I agree, encouraging groups to be there, hey, if you are claiming that this is important to you, example as an AFP student, this is the kind of space that you should be showing up and shouting out in. But that mandatory component can be more harmful than helpful.
Yeah.
But I did see a lot of AFP Council people there, which was excellent. And I believe Maria, who is my co-MC, is on the AFP Council, and she did a great job. But yeah, it's a really powerful and really wonderful event.
We definitely were chatting about it in council, and I know when we were talking earlier in the podcast about, how much of us knew what was going on with Consent Week, I think there's possibly a disproportionate number of informed AFP students just because it is so relevant. But I wonder other subjects like business or health, anything like that, it would be interesting to see how aware they are of this past week's events.
And I would even consider myself a quote-unquote informed AFP student. I'd say I'm rather in the loop, and I was seeing Consent Week, Visible at X, whatever, Take Back the Night, but I wasn't seeing what it is, we are marching for our rights, and but I also feel like that is somewhat reflective of what the university wants to put out there, and they don't want to be like, hey, this is an issue that we have and people are marching again, you know?
We were talking about this in a conversation earlier. It's a little bit tough because for people to say like, hey, this is super important, it also requires them to admit that there's a problem. Right?
There you go.
And it's not always the best look when you're like, oh my gosh, you know, sexual violence is really prevalent, so we have these, you know, huge survivor spaces. That requires the first step of saying sexual violence is a problem. So that's why in certain spaces where people are hyper aware of it, for example, AFP, you're very, you know, you're really in tune with the prevalence of the issue, and other groups who might not be as in tune with that or in the loop, like you said, it might not be top of mind or top in regular conversations in those groups.
I also want to say, like, I think as women, we're a lot more aware of that the sexual violence that happens on campuses, university campuses worldwide. I, for one, was warned a lot by my parents and like family, and I know my sister was too, just because it is such a huge problem on every single campus. But a lot of these things, I'm from the US, and there it's not as widely acknowledged as it is here, which I think is a great thing. But there it's really like shameful because it is hard to admit, like, yeah, we have this problem, but in the end, pretty much every single university campus has this problem. And I feel like most women are affected by it, so we do know a lot more, but that's
you're
what I have to
absolutely right.
say.
And it's like the problem is going to be a problem is going to be a problem. It will exist and persist, frankly, no matter what. So the ability to admit, like, this sucks, this is prevalent, and we are taking steps to address it, to elevate survivor voices, that kind of thing, is a strength, not a weakness at all. And I think that driving that message home is super important, and that's why I'm so grateful that groups like AFP, Student Council, and stuff like that are pushing for the acknowledgement of these issues and participation in these things. Last year, I wrote a thesis examining the impact of ways to change on students' knowledge about sexual violence, their self-efficacy to intervene, essentially how confident are they that they could intervene in XYZ scenario. And then also we asked them about their experiences witnessing and intervening in sexual violence. We did not ask about sexual violence they have experienced. My research we had around, I think in the end, just over 250 students participate in the survey, spread across all years. Unfortunately, because the way our campus works and research here often turns out, the sample was predominantly white and female, but we still had some diversity in the sample. And I believe it came out that 98% at least of students had witnessed some form of sexual violence on campus in the first 6 weeks of school. Like, that is so prevalent. I mean, you know, we did brief them with a reminder about what encompasses sexual violence. So that's anything from a rape joke or a sly comment about coercion to rape or assault. But 98% of people who took our survey had witnessed some form of sexual violence in the first 6 weeks.
One of the things that they discuss in the Waves of Change sort of seminar is that there's a Statistics Canada report from 2019 that says that about 71% of students at Canadian post-secondary schools witness or experience unwanted sexualized behaviors in a post-secondary setting. So, like Emmy said, this is such a prevalent issue on our campus, which is why AFP Student Council decided to make an Instagram post just talking about how we feel about Consent Week and why things like that are important on campus.
That Statistics Canada number is witnessed or experienced, and their survey, if I remember correctly, was like, you know, tens of thousands of students across Canada, so it's a little bit more robust than what my survey was able to look at, but it's still, all in all, the take-home message is extraordinarily prevalent. So, like, almost every single person will witness or experience sexual violence in their lifetime, and especially during post-secondary.
And even like you were saying before, not everyone becomes a stat that they're acknowledging within the school. Like, we talk to women in the bathroom at the bar that are like telling us these traumatizing stories that happen to them. Like, we all have experienced this. I think that's really telling in a place like this.
When I came here, from Waves of Change, I actually did learn a lot more about sexual violence, because when you say sexual violence, a lot of people think of like rape or like physical violence within sexual circumstances.
Aggressive
But
behavior.
yeah, but it's really not just that. Like, it's any sort of harassment or, spoken
Truly,
or actions. And honestly, I wasn't that aware, because whenever people said sexual violence, I was like, oh, I've never been raped. But like what you said,
Yeah.
pretty much every single woman has experienced what falls under the umbrella of sexual violence.
Exactly.
If we think about the pyramid of sexual violence, right? Obviously, all forms of sexual violence have very harmful effects on people, but if we look at the smaller, looking at the bottom parts of that pyramid, the quote-unquote smaller or, really less blatant forms, so rape jokes and coercion and sharing somebody's nudes without their consent, right? It's those things that if we let people get away with those things, it provides the structure for those more, I'm using air quotes here, serious or really harmful forms of sexual violence to exist and persist. So if we are targeting those smaller forms, those things that we may not immediately clock as being sexual violence, but they fall under that umbrella that we regularly, as women and as university students, everybody, there are survivors in every space, we regularly encounter those. If we can begin to break those down, it will affect the framework that allows those more serious forms to exist. So recognizing what falls under that umbrella of sexual violence and seeing it in day-to-day life, unfortunately, which we all do, and combating it as you see it. It may feel like a really small thing, so calling out somebody for that inappropriate rape joke or shoving off that guy who's dancing with you a little too close at the bar, those little nudges towards destroying that structure and that framework that allows those more serious forms to exist is so important and so helpful, and that's why we try and increase visibility of what is sexual violence. Like you guys said, like you may not realize that you may have experienced it, but once you do and you're able to call it out in the future, it's making steps towards destroying that rape culture that exists and persists in our world.
I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and say thanks to everyone who was in today's podcast. So thank you to Emmy Stewart, Emmy Hickey, Reese Crocker, Kalia Johnson, and Lexi Hubbard for being in today's episode. I'm your host, Leah Hicknall, and we'll see you next time. Bye.